Together, we work as one for better LGBTIQ lives. Outright.
All right, welcome everyone. We're really excited for day 2 of OWL Summit. I hope you all have had a really good, productive, and engaging time so far. We're very excited to have this conversation. The title of the panel today is Amalgamations, Insights on Developing Partnerships with Companies to Advance LGBTIQ Equality. First, I want to say thank you. Thank you to Outright. We're just so impressed with everything that's been happening this week and all the work you'll do at every level. Thank you to the panelists who we will introduce in 1 minute. Just very, very excited to talk to them about their expertise, their leadership, and their insight into some of the ways partnerships can really add a lot of leverage to all the work that many of the activists and organizations do around the world. And finally, thank you to you all. We're really excited for y'all to be joining, and we're going to have a really great discussion today. Thank you all so much. So first, what I'll do is we're going to do quick introductions. I'm going to give some context, and then we're going to jump right in, try to stay as much out of the way as possible to give the panelists and you all real time to have an engagement. And we will be watching the chat for any comments or questions y'all have, as well as we're going to have about 10 or so minutes at the end for a Q&A. So with that, what I'll do is if each of the panelists can just say your name, if you want to share your preferred pronoun, your title, and the organization. And then let's do something, it's the holidays, so maybe share something that you've eaten or you're gonna make that you're really excited about that you might wanna share, eaten or cooked over the holidays. I'll get started. So my name's Alap Shah. My pronouns are he or they. I am the co-chair of the board of directors at Outright International, one of just a lot of privilege of being in this role. And then I eat everything, but I'm really excited about eating pumpkin pie, which is something I don't really eat a lot of except during the holidays. And so with that, maybe Molly, do you mind if I ask you to go first?
Thank you so much, Ala. Molly Q. Ford. I am the Vice President of Employer Branding at Salesforce. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am most looking forward to, I make a world-class pecan pie, but the irony is it's too sweet, I don't eat it. So I make one every single year, and that's my signature dish. And I love to make it and give it out to friends and family. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Molly, so much for joining. Brad?
Thank you so much, Al. So Brad Baumel, my pronouns are he, him, and his, and I am our global head of LGBTQ plus affairs at JP Morgan Chase. I also, like you, I'll eat a lot and everything, but I think I'm going to hang out with Molly because my not that I make, my stepmom makes this thing called a Kentucky High Pie, which is, think of it as pecan pie with chocolate chips. And it's like probably way too sweet for Molly, but like my favorite thing in the universe.
Amazing. This sounds amazing. And then last but not least, Jen.
Yeah, thanks, Olive. It's great to be here with all of you. I'm Jen Carter. My pronouns are she, her. I've been at Google for around 15 years now, and I am the global head of technology at google.org, which is Google's philanthropic arm. And I also lead the company's pro bono and skills-based volunteering efforts. So in both capacities, really just focused on harnessing the power of technology and the expertise of Googlers to accelerate the impact of nonprofits and civic entities around the world. Super excited about this food question. Food is one of the things I look forward to the most around the holidays. So yeah, lots of things I'm looking forward to, but I was raised Jewish, and Hanukkah's coming up in just a few days. So I'm very excited to cook and eat latkes, which is essentially a type of potato pancake.
Beautiful. I love it. That sounds all really great. Again, thank you all so much for joining. It's a really important discussion at every level. Let me just give a few minutes of context of why we're talking today and why we think this conversation is so important. As many of you know, the global challenges facing the LGBT movement is great. We've seen a lot of good progress, but oftentimes that progress also faces backlash. And as we all know, progress is not always linear. One of the best things about Outright is that we work with you all in partnership to understand some of the challenges on the ground at the government level and the international level. So I want to just articulate a few challenges that we've seen, and we'd love to have the panelists and you all tell us, how is this impacting you all? First of all, we've seen and we continue to see discrimination to LGBTIQ communities, especially compounded by the pandemic. We often see this happen in different ways, and we'll speak to that in a second as well. One other thing that we see and we hear a lot of from organizations is inadequate resourcing. And again, a really good topic I want to dig in with the panelists about how do we think about resourcing and be creative about the way we know that some of the resourcing is finite and is challenging to always get. Third, something that we see a lot of is, of course, the increasing polarization within country and between countries. And we just see it exacerbating, especially to marginalized communities and communities that are really fighting for equal rights. Depending on where you are or the way we see some of these movements, we've also seen a rise of religious-based LGBTIQ phobia. There's a lot of power within religious organizations to harness equality and community, and at times we've seen it kind of work against us as well. Also, authoritarian tendencies have been really on the rise, and we're seeing it in a lot of places, in a lot of places that we would not often expect to see it. And then, last but not least, a trend we're seeing a lot of is, of course, the anti-trans movement that's really gaining momentum. And so, I just shared a bunch of big topics because I think what we're seeing is arrests, shutdowns, anti-LGBTIQ laws across many different places: Afghanistan, China, Ghana, Honduras, Hungary, Indonesia, and the US. And with that, we see a lot of opportunity in the intersection of these partnerships. Civil society organizations, the media, and corporate partnerships have a lot to do and a lot that they can do to really support and face some of these enormous challenges at hand. No sector alone can tackle it. We do believe in the intersectional ecosystem of partnerships and the ability to really work with corporations and corporate responsibility to further advocacy and further this movement that is so important to us all. And so this session, we're going to jump right in, which is how do individual activists and organizations better understand what companies look for in partnerships, how you all can work with different leaderships and different creative ideas of engaging the different parts of that ecosystem to really advance your work, resourcing, and tools. So with that context, we're going to jump right in. One of the things that I talked to the panelists about as we're talking about this session was, for many people, they may not even understand what the process really looks like. What is a funnel for corporate and partnership engagement? So Brad, if you don't mind, I'd love to start with you, which is, within your experience and at JP Morgan Chase, tell us a little bit about both. How do you think about that funnel of partnership engagement? And are there certain points that you want to highlight that really matter for activists coming to a company like JP Morgan Chase?
Yeah, so thank you, Alip. I appreciate that. Funnel is a really good word. And this is why I think it is. I get approached every day by community organizations to engage. And that engagement is usually money, but it could span a number of different things. So, I've been involved in this agenda for 25 years at JP Morgan Chase, but I've only been in this role where this is all I do for the last 2 years. And so coming into this role, when I looked at the landscape of organizations that we partner with, there were hundreds. And I would argue we can't be hugely impactful with hundreds of organizations, despite our size and the breadth. So one of the things that my team did is we actually built stuff around the funnel. We call it our partnership framework. It's a very sophisticated way to look at what are we trying to achieve. So our mission and vision of creating equity and inclusion for the community, where are we trying to achieve it globally, countries, cities? How are we indexed with partners in those domains, over, under, missing altogether? And how do we want to start thinking about these partners on like a maturity or tiering basis? Because you can't invest in all of them equally. So we've created this framework for evaluation. We're going to use it to do annual attestation. We're looking at like 3 levels of partner engagement: emerging, strategic, which you'd think would be the last, and something we call surround sound, which we could talk about a little bit more later. We're looking at where we under indexed or over indexed based on our goals and aspirations for truly achieving equity and inclusion. And how does that differentiate itself based on what is going on in the localities around the world? And so the funnel is really important. I'm trying to reduce it so that we could be more intentional and really have a greater impact. So rather than spreading ourselves way too thin, spread ourselves as thin as we need to, but really look to hone in on key partners who are doing work we cannot do because we are not positioned to do this work, not staffed. It's not part of our like true mission. And really invest in those partners in the strategic and surround sound space to materially change things for our community around the world.
That's great. Let me ask one more question to follow up on that, Brad. I think you shared a lot of really good, interesting, both strategic insights and some practicality. The one thing I wanted to double click on was the last part, right? Key partnerships of work that JP Morgan may not be doing and may not be investing in. As an activist or an organization who may be very far from JP Morgan Chase, what is the best 1, 2, and 3 ways that they can understand JP Morgan strategy and how they could differentiate in an area y'all do not invest in?
So I'll just pick an example because there's probably hundreds of them, right?
Perfect.
So refugees is a really good example. So we are not, as a financial institution, in the business of supporting refugees, but in our community, there is a dire need in many countries around the world today where it's becoming harder and harder to be LGBTQ+. And there are organizations in this space that find them, provide security for them, get them to holding areas where they can live, not be threatened. And in those spaces, they need to be trained and educated and provided with opportunities. And so like this is a space that we are not organized to have staffing around, but there are organizations out there doing it. You know, another great example with all of the anti-LGBTQ+ legislation out there, and you know, we're a big bank, so we're not going to get really vocal about being against it all, despite me personally being against it all. It's finding smaller organizations on the ground in these places that are servicing our people and helping them to survive and grow and thrive. So these are like great examples of like where we're not positioned to do something, but we need to, because it will positively impact our employees, our clients, and the communities where we operate.
Thank you for that. Jen, might I ask you as a follow-up, like, you know, from the standpoint of Google or your own experience, do you find a lot of similarity to what Brad said, or are there different places where you see some of the success or maybe lack of success within your own purview?
Yeah, no, it definitely resonates with Echo. I think a lot of what Brad shared. I think at a high level, just understanding kind of these different philanthropic pathways at a company, I think is really helpful for someone who's looking to partner, because I do think before I've been in this world for a while now, but before I think it was surprising to me kind of how many there are, and the resourcing and decision making is often distributed throughout the company, because each philanthropic opportunity can sort of serve a different purpose within the various business units. So I'm on the CSR side, we're focused on social impact, but there are folks in the HR function who might be interested in these types of partnerships to help with recruitment or retention, or there are folks in other areas of the company who are interested in community engagement. And so I do just think there are kind of a surprising number of options there, and it can be helpful to really map those out and understand them so that you know who you might want to partner with. And then once you have a sense of those kind of potential points of engagement, you can really start to build your case to taking into account what that business unit might be interested in, and trying to align with their goals to kind of make the case, whether it's a human rights case or a business case or an economic case. I won't go into too much detail on those now, but happy to later. But
yeah, That's
Yeah.
great. No, I mean, I think, and then like Molly, I'll come to you as well next in a second. I think both what Brad and Jen said to me really, I find a lot of understanding around playing both sides of the world, working in nonprofit and working in the corporate sector. And what I heard from both of them is, think of the individual that you are sending that application to, or who is the individual. They have their own needs, their own demands, their own boss, and then context matters. So personalizing it and taking time to personalize it to that individual request is going to make a huge benefit to any organization. And so, Molly, please go ahead. Yeah,
really
please.
quick before you go on to Molly, and I'm sorry, Molly, I just want to piggyback off on something that Jen said, which was amazing. If you can find, there aren't many me's, there aren't many like global heads of LGBTQ plus affairs. I think I'm the only one. But like find the most representative of that, because it's hard to navigate an organization to find the 10 places that you might be able to connect with. But if you can find someone that's connected to those 10 places like me, it could help exponentially get you to the right place. Even for my own employees, it's hard to navigate this company. Imagine coming in from the outside as an activist. So that's another like just food for thought I'd put on Jen's comments.
That's a really good point. Thank you. So, Molly, I'd love to kind of get your expertise and advice on just that. So let's assume there's a world where the networking and finding the individual is going to be a huge leg up for any nonprofit or activist who wants to partner. But there may not be that. And so I think there's also a world where we'd love to get your advice of what could a nonprofit do to position themselves as they prepare for the ask? And how have you seen successes in organizations strengthening themselves in that process?
Thank you. I would say preparing for that ask. For us at Salesforce, you got to speak Salesforce, right? What does that mean? We're a pretty transparent company on what's going on, what's our product, our technology, our message. How do you align to what we're doing? Let me give you an example. Right now, our CEO is part of the Business Roundtable, and the Business Roundtable has a priority, like many of your CEOs, has a priority around ESG, so environmental, societal, governance, and saying that companies that focus on these things, right? At Salesforce, we say business is a platform for change. So we're looking for ways to actively make an impact on the community. So for us, it's like, okay, if I see the company is focused on ESGs, you've got environmental goals, you've got societal goals, and that's where you would come in with LGBTQ advocacy. How do I literally tell people, I use my hand to make the example, you don't move against the grain, you go with it. So how do I align to initiatives that Salesforce is doing? How do I align and play into there? But to just jump on what Jen and Brad were talking about, for me, it really is about telling folks to get creative on how you get in the door, right? Like many of your organizations, we have a foundation. You can become a Salesforce nonprofit customer using our technology. I'm not selling y'all something, I promise. But by using the technology, you've got to into Salesforce. You'll know the sales teams, you'll know folks, right? And the biggest thing we have is our employees, like I bet both of your employees, we get what we call VTO, volunteer time off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Salesforce employees each get 56 hours a year to be out in their community. So for example, tomorrow I'm going to go set up, or Friday, I'm going to go set up for a holiday turkey giveaway. And I'm going to do that during business hours. And I'm going to block my calendar and say, I'm going off to do VTO, right? So if you know that, how do you then, running a nonprofit, say, how do I engage Salesforce employees? Let me see if I can sign up to be one of the vendors their employees go do VTO with, right? We have a platform where I can say, Friday, I'm free. I would like to do some VTO. Where can I go do it, right? So think about, all the ways you can enter into an organization, because as Brad said, it's super complicated. I'd have trouble telling you this person, that person, wayfinding. So how do you then have entry points into the organization? Speak their language. What are their initiatives and how do you align to it? Get creative on your entry point, right? How do you come in? Am I coming in as a foundation or a nonprofit? Am I coming in because I found an ally? Am I coming in because I have the ERGs coming to volunteer with me, right? Get creative on how you get in there. And then the preparation is knowing their priorities and how you align to that.
I love that. I mean, again, just to reinstate, a lot of what I heard was really, really smart, which is the first thing is You want to move with the grain of the organization. So again, that just taking a little bit of time to prepare, to understand a Salesforce or a Google and what their priorities are. Can I ask Molly, like, where would they find it? Is it all on the website? Do they need to go look somewhere special?
Equality.com. Real simple. Equality.com, Salesforce.com. We're pretty transparent. We don't keep many secrets. So it's all out there, right?
Yeah. I love that. So do that. And then, Brad or Jen, please chime in. Like, I think the thing that I want to kind of double click on with any of y'all is that creative aspect. How do you get creative beyond just asking for money? And have y'all seen places, successes, especially given a lot of the activists we're probably are on this panel are in other countries that are not in America. Their work is a little bit less tangible than building a school or handing out food, maybe, but that work may be happening outside of the presence of some of your corporate offices, if you will. So how have you seen some of that creativeness of groups that may not be physically aligned with that volunteer opportunity?
Jen, do you want to take a stab and then I'll jump in?
Sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a few different things came to mind. Definitely a lot of what Molly mentioned resonated, but I think that being creative for us, the way that we think about it, there's no shortage of problems that we can work on. And so we do, I think Brad mentioned this as well, just there's so many different groups that we can work with, but we're not going to be able to have that same impact with all of them. And so we try to think about where we can uniquely as Google add value that maybe another company couldn't, so that they take those opportunities. So for us, that's often, projects around making the world's information more accessible and useful. There are a lot of pockets where, there are aspects that are unavailable, that data, and if we can make it available, that can really help impact policy and lead to real change. Or, maybe for us, it's projects that make use of machine learning. Obviously many companies that could do that, but we think we have some folks who can be especially helpful there. So I think that's one. Again, it really does help to kind of tailor your application, your idea to what the company does best, just because then you find these partnerships that just make a lot of sense.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Brad, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you look at any of us, you might naturally see this is what I could do with this company. So with Google tech or data, same with Salesforce with tech and client solutions, and with us banking. But I would argue don't do that because we all could do so much more. So like at JP Morgan Chase, we start with the stuff we've already talked about, which is in-kind support, using our army. So we have 80,000 around the world, employees that could jump in and help. We move from that to some of the work that Jen probably does in her space, which is our Tech for Social Good program, where nonprofits can sign up and we build websites for them and we find tech solutions, often Salesforce, for them to solve problems, and we help implement them. We've got something called our Service Corps, which is free in-kind consulting teams, where if they've got a problem, marketing or finance or whatever it is, we have a team of volunteers that we put together as a team to help consult on whatever it is that they're trying to tackle. And then our foundation and grant work. And there are just so many things that we all can do that might not be in your line of sight because you think of us in one way. So don't be limited.
I love that. So again, getting creative, really individualizing the ask, and finding ways to create partnerships in places you may not have assumed. Because again, there's a lot of opportunities out there. Money is one part of it, but I imagine for any activist, how do you all sustainably create long-term partnerships? So Molly, one thing I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, is what happens when an organization maybe applies to something or asks for it and they get rejected? What would you recommend they do, after they get no, this isn't the right fit? What would you recommend people do, and how should they take that decision?
I would recommend that they try to gain insight on why they were rejected, right?
Okay.
So for example, one of my big things, I don't have a lot of flexibility in the middle of the year to switch my budgets around. So things happen at budget planning season, which is now. And then if you hit me in April wanting to support your June Pride event, I probably don't have the flexibility. So knowing about that, I would say in the fall when I'm doing my budget planning and looking at my next year, I think that is a lot more, it could be timing is just one of my examples, right? It could absolutely be timing. Find out how much information you can about why you were rejected. So that'll help you go back the next time. And then that's when you get the opportunity to get creative, right? What are those other entry points? What are those other opportunities to get into the organization?
Yeah, I love that. And something that I've seen again from some of my work is, as you all alluded to, yes, funding is important, but the way the world is now, so much of Molly, Jen, and Brad's organizations can help with information security, compliance. How do you scale an organization to have deeper impact? What does it look like to get a more public presence? How do you train both activists, media to start having these kind of conversations with the right hashtags, everything in between? How do you have a good database so that you're really supporting your partners, your constituents, and your donors? All those things really make sense. But I think Molly had a really good point about again, back to the funnel, which is each organization, especially big ones, do have a certain predictable timeline of how things work. So maybe Jen, like, do you find a similar situation where unsolicited proposals don't really get that much time, but there is a timeline that really works when doing an ask?
Yeah, I think definitely agree. There are sort of certain timelines and lots of different reasons for maybe it not being a fit at this time. I think in addition to sort of trying to understand the why, which might just be a timeline issue, it might be an issue area thing. Again, I think we've all talked about we're open on our websites about sort of some of the focus areas that we have that make sense for us to work on, but we're often willing to recommend other funders. We get that question a lot, like, oh, this actually isn't a great fit for us, but we think this other company might make a ton of sense because they are invested heavily in this area. And we try to do that even whenever we do open calls. Sometimes it's purely not a fit. Sometimes we just have to make really tough decisions. And we've actually shared the list of orgs that we that just missed the kind of cutoff, that we just didn't have enough to fund. And I've shared that with other funders who have asked for that. So I think those collaborations can also be really helpful. Even if it's not a great fit for us, it might be a really good fit for someone else. Or as everyone has said, it might not be a great fit for us now, or it might not be a great fit for us now for grant funding, but we might be able to support in some other way, whether that's through in-kind or volunteers.
Great. So then let me just keep moving down the funnel here. So, understanding a organization or company's strategic priorities, most of it should be pretty accessible through a Google search or the company's website. Great. Number two, think about the individual, the chief queer, sometimes as they say affectionately, who is the person that's the ally or a person who really can help navigate that internally. And what is that individual's directive, obligation, responsibility? Where do they sit? Are they in HR? Are they in the business? Are they in the foundation? That really will depend on what their priorities and objectives are. Number two, preparing the ask, both getting creative, understanding the timeline funnel, thinking about the ask, right? Now, let's say we keep moving down the process, maybe giving some insight. I'll go to Brad, you first. If you can share, what does that process often look like? And what are the criteria you're doing to say you've gotten 1 or 1,000 proposals? What are some of the things that y'all often do to winnow it down to that finalist group?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, it depends on, are they approaching me or am I approaching them?
Okay, sure. That's helpful.
Because
yeah,
sometimes I approach them given a noted gap I've identified where I'm under indexed completely in that partner. So that's kind of down to what is it we want to do? So it's about building a relationship with that partner, understanding the breadth of what they do. I'm doing this right now with a new partner. And then picking, because it's going to be way too much for me to engage with them in, picking the 1 or 2 things we really want to spend our time on, and then building that into our relationship and spending our upfront time together on those 1 or 2 things so that we could be really material. I mean, if they're approaching me, I run it through the criteria. I make sure that I'm not over-indexed on whatever it is. And then it's going to come down to what is their need, and does that fit with what is my gap? Because sometimes those two things conflict. They might really need me to invest in X, but I might already be spending $1 million on X with another partner. So it's not giving up. It's how can we be creative about, like, I really do want to invest in this partner, but that's not the need I want to invest in. And how do we get creative about that together to get to the point where, and then when we have our 1 or 2 things or 10 or 11 with some partners, it's what metrics do we want to put on it? Because honestly, in my business, and I run this as a business, I want to see the value, because they're going to come back to me in a year, depending on the size of the tenure of the contract you build with them, and want more. I want to prove that it was worth every hour we spent on it, dollar we spent on it. I want to build metrics that are outcome based, that can be proven to have had the value we intended.
I love that. Molly, do you mind if I ask you a follow-up to that? I think that's a really good point. So we're walking down the funnel, we got a good sense of it. There might be some groups who y'all can't fund, and we talked about what that would look like for them to come back. But I think Brad's moving into a really interesting space, which is with, let's say, one of the organizations on this call works with Salesforce, the funding is approved. Where do you see that value or success? What are some of the things that people should be thinking about to ensure success, to ensure those metrics align with both the organization that they're a part of and your organization, Salesforce, in terms of proving that outcome and impact? What are some of the things that people should be thinking about to make sure it is successful and that year after year, it continues to prove value for both sides?
Alip, I would say I have some good news and I have some bad news. I think as kind of advocates, our day of having free checkbooks is over, right?
Sure.
This external macroeconomic environment we're walking into is heavily impacting us. My ability to throw spaghetti on the wall and just give it a try, those days are over. We are a data-driven organization, and I need to be able to drive value from a partnership. What was my ROI? What did I get? One of the things we're very strict about at Salesforce, for example, and I'm sure Google does this, if we give you a grant, we want to know in a year, what did you do with those funds? What was the result? What was the metric? I have the same criteria, right? So I need to be able to say how, what value did this partnership drive? What value did I see? And those things need to be tangible dollars. Relationship and community is absolutely important. But right now I need to show an ROI from the partnerships I have. And I think it's the same thing like Brad said, like, am I over-indexed in one area, right? That's a really sad thing that it's like, well, I can only have so many organizations that do gender equality. I can only have so many organizations in my portfolio that are doing LGBTQ advocacy, right? I can only have so many. So how do I determine which ones I move forward with and which ones I do not? It's going to be, who am I receiving value from and can help me prove that ROI?
Love that. That's great. Jen, maybe same question to you. I mean, what have you seen as the ability to really, or what are some of the characteristics of real successful partnerships year after year? Because most organizations, I imagine, want to build a multi-year and really deep partnership with all three of y'all. So what are some things you have seen to get that ROI, to prove success in this model?
Yeah, I think one thing that is always top of mind for us is kind of what the theory of change is and how we'll know if we're successful. And often some of these things take many years to develop. And so what are the leading indicators that things are going well, so that you can kind of have an early sense and correct if not. I think another thing that, again, might be different per company, but one of the sort of underlying philosophies that we have around the work that we do is about the role that philanthropy can and should play. And for us, we think philanthropy is kind of uniquely situated to take risky long-term bets. If you compare it to other sources of funding like government that, is accountable to taxpayers, or private investors who tend to operate on maybe shorter timelines and obviously have to make financial returns, philanthropy can really put impact first and have some patience. And so we tend to think of it as risk capital, and that kind of affects the impact metrics that we look at. And so it works very well at Google. Google is obviously known for taking these kind of risky bets or moonshots, but we look for organizations that are maybe trying out a new idea that we can test and see if it works. So to give just a tangible example, it was probably 10 years ago now that we that Give Directly first pitched the Google.org team about direct cash transfers. And it's hard to believe now because, you know, they're sort of center stage in a number of different ways. But at the time, you know, people were really skeptical about the idea, but Give Directly had some preliminary data that supported it, and we ended up investing in them, and we funded an RCT, you know, a randomized controlled trial to compare it to other forms of aid like in-kind support. And at a high level, the data showed that cash grants work. Giving directly is both more efficient and effective than in-kind aid. And so I think that's one of the types of things that's really appealing to us about these projects is there something we can do that's not just going to help the individual nonprofit, but really advance the sector as a whole? And then what are the tangible steps that we see making progress there? First, trying it out with a given org, but then how can we sort of work with them to share our learnings and bring that to others?
That's great. And I imagine most organizations, especially in the LGBTIQ space, understand that both the individual and the global opportunity there. Brad, we're getting a couple of questions, and I wanted to ask this question to you, Brad, specifically, just given your unique role. I think Emily asked a question in the chat, which is sometimes these words are abstract or hard. And again, we talked about it is because every individual company and individual might need some specificity, but are there specific things that you can share to groups that are doing LGBTIQ work, which is what are some of the specific metrics or outcomes that you're seeing for the next year or two? To get really specific, what are some of those metrics or outcomes you're really hoping for and that you're seeing in this space?
Yeah, and it really depends on like the partnership, right? So the way I'm organized on my team is I've got 4 pillar strategies. So one is employee-based, one is for our clients, one is for our business customers, and one is for our communities. So I'll just take an example, business customers. So entrepreneurs are, if you're underrepresented and from an underrepresented community, you have almost limited to no access to certain things. Women have seen this, the Black community have seen this. You go to the intersection of those two, it's even worse. You add LGBT to that mix, it's even worse. So we build metrics around, can we find them? Because we can't ask entrepreneurs if they're gay. Once we find them, can we coach them? Can we provide them access to funders who are interested in them? Can we help them grow their business? Can we build for them? So it really depends on what investing you're doing. In this advocacy space, it's, have we used our voice, our in-kind support, our money to influence enough to get more people out to vote, to have that like lend itself towards something more positive in that community to change the dynamic for our community. So again, it really depends on where the partnership is going and what it is you're investing in, but there are tangible outcome-based metrics you could build on almost any investment you want to do with any partner.
Right, that's right. We got about 10 minutes left. I'm watching the chat, and I think we got a couple of questions directly to us. Yeah. So Jen, let me ask you a question. I think Google, I think all three of y'all, but Google specifically, do you find that, or do you have any advice on just the different levels of engagement? So there's like the corporate Google office, there's offices in different regions, and then there might be even local opportunities. How should someone think about navigating those different levels, especially with Google?
Yeah, I think there are definitely different levels, and again, different parts of the organization that it might make sense to interact with. I think before getting into kind of some of those differences and nuances, I actually think it could be helpful to think about the similarities between them. I think there are kind of some underlying principles in how we think about these engagements that when applied locally or regionally might end up leading to sort of different strategies. So as one example, in terms of an underlying principle that's really important to us is this idea that before supporting external groups, you should kind of have your own house in order, so to speak. So, you know, ensure your employees and their families are supported before we kind of go out and do external advocacy. I think, you know, makes sense to do that in general. It's the right thing to do. And also, I think it can come across as kind of hypocritical or rainbow washing if a corporation you know, lacks some of the internal policies to protect their own employees, but is then, you know, doing some external work. And so that's sort of an underlying principle across, you know, all of our engagements when we're deciding locally, regionally, or globally what we want to do. But when you put it into practice, it actually may end up leading to some differences. So a company, may have more work to do to get their own house in order in, a certain region. And so in that place, the engagement might actually be having a CSO like Outright consult on your own company's products and policies, while obviously being compensated. Whereas in a different region where maybe you are more ready to sort of engage externally, it might look like working with an Oregon aggregate funder to identify small grassroots organizations that might make sense to fund, where, for identifying that from folks on the ground who have that local expertise. So I think it's sort of a unifying principle in terms of how we think about these engagements that might end up resulting in differences globally, regionally, and locally. I think one more example, again, of kind of this unifying concept is the idea from the disability rights movement, but nothing about us without us. So you can't, have a strong impact without that philosophy that, you need to center the voices and perspectives of those who are most impacted. And equally important is the idea that work can't fall solely on the shoulders of impacted community members, and in fact, just the opposite. So in terms of how that shows up in our work, it means that we believe really strongly in the value of these coalitions, of cross-sector collaborations, of public-private partnerships, but where, you kind of have experts on the ground, folks who are most proximate to the issue, as Brian Stevenson would say, and then, but working in collaboration with private companies like Google, the private sector that could provide sort of some additional financial support or in-kind offering or volunteers. And so, again, it's like a unifying principle for all of our engagements, but it means you end up showing up pretty differently depending on, who you're going to partner for something locally is going to be a very different coalition than if you're thinking about some kind of global initiative.
Great. Yeah, I think all that makes sense. I am we got another question in the chat, and Molly, I wanted to maybe ask this to you, just given your role in Salesforce, which is a lot of organizations, especially ones that are somewhat US based, are talking a lot about diversity and inclusion, DIBA, and the different ways to think about it, both for the internal organization you represent and maybe its impact on external. When a LGBTIQ activist organization sees, oh, Salesforce is really committed to diversity, how should they be thinking about that beyond just grant money? Are there different ways that the organization can engage to support that D&I initiative from where they stand? An organization based in the Philippines or in Uganda, what could they do to help move forward that diversity and inclusion initiative at Salesforce?
I would say if you're seeking funding, think about not just grants, but sponsorships, right? How to have a partnership with the organization. That entry point as a customer as well, and that volunteer time, right? But I also would think about, if you are a global international organization, it would be important to understand what's our global stance, right? What are we doing on that local market? And that's back to that being creative on your entry point. Is it getting involved with our employee resource groups, right? Can you find an advocate within Outforce, which is our ERG, to help you advocate? It's not just about, and I really, Alop, you have now taught me Chief Queer. I'm going to get in trouble with that one. But I was like, find an out executive or an ally or an advocate that is passionate about the cause to get involved. Yeah, and I think our ERGs is somebody we cannot forget. For example, my ERG president sits in the Utah office, right? So very much engaged with the legislation happening around the middle of the US, around the trans community. So really figuring out how do you engage with folks where they are, what they're interested in, what they're passionate about, and getting in touch with that local team.
I love that. Brad or Jen, anything else to add to that from your perspectives? Nope. Okay. So maybe sure, and I'm mute for something tough to get to. So we got about 4 minutes left. I want to kind of just do one last roundtable of a summary, which is that I've been really excited to have this conversation for a while. I think we really did a good, I really enjoyed the conversation, all the conversations and the answers y'all provided. What I want to do is just kind of in a closing way, go to each individual and say, one question, whether it's a summary or something that's good parting for the people on the call. So let me just kind of preface it, which is we heard about the importance of understanding the strategic values of the organization. Finding that chief queer or ally is super important. Thinking about values and ROI at every step of that funnel And I think the last thing I want to kind of double click on is what I've heard is there is the impact and the differentiation, number one. There is the how do you engage the employees at the company, whether it's through the ERGs, whether it's through volunteer opportunities, whether it's asking, hey, this company has these types of employees and this skill set. How can I do an ask based that will leverage their expertise? The one thing I didn't hear much of is I think there's also probably a little bit of importance on marketing and social media and brand that really matters. And so within any of those intersections, I'd love to just ask, kind of starting with Jen, what is the one thing that you think will be really interesting or impactful in the next year that you're seeing, any individual can do, whether it's, again, thinking about the brand, thinking about the volunteer opportunity, thinking about the intersections of what's coming up. Is there anything else that you think we haven't talked about that you want to share?
Yeah, I'd maybe just double down on what has been said, but I think the high level thing for me is that none of us can do this alone, and we need to work together to advance LGBTIQ equality. And we need to form these coalitions and work together to support activists and CSOs on the ground with with the resources that the private sector can provide, whether that is funding or in-kind donations or pro bono support. So that's probably one thing that is always top of mind. And then I think the other is just that we can all continue to learn a lot from one another, whether that is by reading some of the reports that I saw being shared in the comments there, or by chatting directly. I'd encourage folks to reach out to me or equivalent folks at other corporations, obviously Molly and Brad, and many others, just to kind of continue learning from one another about what's working and what isn't. And also, reaching out to Outright and other equivalent orgs. They've been, you all have been really incredible thought partners for us, and can hopefully be helpful to others as folks continue to think about developing these partnerships.
Thank you so much, Jen. Molly, anything to add?
I would just add one final piece is be a great partner to work with. I have to be very candid that when there's one or two organizations focused on one specific community and it's difficult to do business with them, it makes it really hard on us, right? Sure. Be a great partner. And that includes, letting us know where our money went. How did that, getting back to that data-driven approach of what was the outcome? What were you able to do with those funds? What were the successes you were able to do? And like I like to say, give me something to brag about.
Love that.
We partnered with XYZ organization. We gave them funding, sponsorship, or a grant into X amount of dollars. This is the community they impacted. Give me that sound bite that I can always be bragging about you when I meet an executive. One of the things I do, random part of my job, is executive onboarding. So meeting a new senior exec. And one of the things I always ask them is where are your passions? Are you coaching? Are you volunteering? And hopefully asking them to, being curious about who they are, I can find out who's an LGBTQ advocate, who might have a child in this community, right? And so then what I want to do is be able to connect the dots. Oh, wow. Are you interested in that? By the way, Outforce is working with Trevor Project. This is what they're trying to do. And if I can rattle off 3 or 4 bullets of, our employees are using their pro bono hours to help the Trevor Project. So we're looking for another exec sponsor. Give me the nugget that I can brag on you about.
I love that.
The things that's really important to me.
That's really, really good advice. I hope everyone heard that. I took note of that. Bradley, anything else in the last minute or two?
So, literally just the last minute. I would echo a lot of what both Jen and Molly have said. And I would say don't underestimate or undervalue the impact and that a corporation or corporations can have on your own mission. And I know you're all after us for money. And I know, like Molly said, we don't get unlimited money, can't throw spaghetti at the wall anymore. But we can help in ways you can't ever imagine. And we don't have to be alone. I mean, I collaborate with Google on a couple of things with other nonprofit partners. We together can bring things to the table that can truly move your goals in a material way. And so finding the right way to connect with us on the right opportunity and not being limited to any one of us at any one point in time will really change things.
Love that. I know we're at time. Thank you so much to all 3 panelists. Thank you to Outright and OutSummit and for everyone attending. Really great tips, really great strategies. I'm really excited for the future. And we're here when y'all need us at Outright. And so thank you again. Have a great day. We really, really appreciate it. And we hope for more of these very soon.